this article we're diving into today, ADHD and Addiction, what's the link? Kind of jumps out at you, doesn't
It
it?
definitely grabs your attention.
Yeah, it makes you think, huh, it's something, well, a question I've heard a lot.
Right, right.
Like, is there really a connection, or is that,
Is it real?
yeah, is this just like a shock value headline?
Well, and that's the thing, right? It's not just a myth. There's actually a lot of research now that shows a pretty strong link between ADHD and addiction.
Okay, so not just like random chance.
Wow.
There's some actual stuff to look at here.
Yeah.
I'm into it. So what kind of research are we talking about? What are we seeing?
There was this one study mentioned in the article that really stuck with me.
Okay.
It said that almost two-thirds of young people who were in treatment for substance abuse also had ADHD, which is a huge number when you actually, think about it.
2/3. Wow. That's not nothing.
No, not at
It
all.
really makes you think about, how important early diagnosis and treatment for ADHD could be,
Oh, absolutely.
to prevent maybe some of these, more serious problems down the line.
Yeah, it really suggests that it might be a much bigger risk factor than a lot of people realize.
So how does that connection even work?
Yeah.
Like the article talks about how symptoms of ADHD can play a role, impulsivity, trouble focusing, all that stuff. So is that the link to addiction?
I think it's definitely a huge piece of the puzzle.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Someone who's naturally more impulsive, they might not always stop and think about the consequences before trying drugs or alcohol.
Yeah, it's like their brain isn't sending up those same red flags.
Exactly. And if you're someone who already craves stimulation and has trouble feeling satisfied, substances, they give you that quick hit of dopamine.
Oh yeah.
It's going to be really appealing, like a shortcut,
Totally.
even if it's just temporary.
So it's like they're trying to manage, maybe even subconsciously, manage these uncomfortable feelings,
Right.
or even just specific ADHD symptoms.
You're exactly right. And the article actually talks about this idea of self-medicating, which can be a big part of it.
Okay, interesting.
But it's not always about, chasing a good feeling either. Sometimes it's about trying to find relief from the challenges of just, living with ADHD every day.
Right, it's rust.
Especially if it's undiagnosed or untreated.
Yeah. We've all heard those stories about people using Adderall or Ritalin to focus,
Yeah.
even if it's not prescribed to them.
Right.
Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
That's a perfect example, actually.
Okay.
And it highlights how tricky this connection can be.
Yeah.
Because you have people who are taking medication to help them,
Right.
but then they can potentially become addicted to that medication.
Whoa. Yeah. That's going to be a really tough spot to be in.
It really is.
And it really shows how complicated this whole thing is.
It really does.
But, on a slightly more, reassuring note, it's good to know there are medications out there that can actually help people with ADHD.
Absolutely.
So it's not a hopeless situation by any means.
No, not at all.
The article really stresses that finding the right treatment is key, though.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So what does that even look like? Is there a one-size-fits-all approach, or is it more nuanced?
Definitely more nuanced. It's definitely not one size fits all. It's really, you want to look at the whole picture and find what works for each individual person.
Okay, so it's not here's the one thing. It's more
Right.
you really got to kind of figure out what's going on.
It's it's like untangling a knot, you know?
Right.
You got to look at the whole thing to figure out the best way to loosen it up.
So the article, it talks about different types of addiction that are commonly linked to ADHD, right?
Right.
So where does it start? What?
Well, it highlights the connection between ADHD and alcohol, which is actually one of the most frequently abused substances by young people with ADHD.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard that alcohol can kind of have that weird effect where it's
Yeah.
it seems like it calms you down at first, but then
Right.
actually in the long run, it can actually make some ADHD symptoms
Well,
worse.
absolutely.
Well, it's kind of this weird.
It's that duality that can be really hard, I think, for people with ADHD to navigate, especially.
Right, because it seems like a solution.
Right. It's oh, this is helping.
Right.
But then, long term, it actually can create way more problems.
It's putting a Band-Aid on it, but it's not really.
Exactly. It's masking the problem rather than actually addressing it.
And then, of course, there's, we talked about the stimulant thing.
Right.
Actually being prescribed something that then you become
Yeah, that's
depended on.
a whole other layer.
Yeah.
The irony is pretty
Wow.
heavy.
And then it mentions some other stuff too, right? Like things that
Yeah, yeah.
people might not think about.
But you wouldn't automatically assume, like,
Yeah.
gambling addiction is one that it brings up, which
Yeah.
I was surprised by that at first, but then, like, when you think about it,
Yeah, okay.
it makes a lot of sense.
So how does that work? How is gambling addiction related?
So gambling, especially like when you win,
Right.
triggers a flood of dopamine in the brain.
Oh, okay.
Very similar to what happens with drugs.
Got it.
And so for someone with ADHD who already is, like, kind of seeking out that stimulation, battling impulsivity,
Right.
gambling can be really, really tempting.
Oh, wow. So it's that same like dopamine hit.
Yeah, and it's really hard to resist, you know?
So it's not really about like what the activity is.
No, it's that reward. It's that, like, that feeling.
Yeah, it's like the reward system in your brain is like,
yeah, like, do that again.
yes, more.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. And it also it connects ADHD to food addiction, which I'm very curious about.
Yeah, and that's a newer area of study for sure.
Okay.
But the research is suggesting that, you know, certain foods, especially the ones that are high in, like, sugar, fat, salt.
Right, the really good stuff.
Yeah, those really palatable foods, they can kind of, like, hijack the reward pathways in the brain, basically.
So again, it's like it's that same dopamine rush.
It's the same, yeah.
That then, like, your brain's like, give me more of that. Why would I eat broccoli when I could have this?
Right, exactly. Exactly. And it can make it really hard to kind of, like, make those rational decisions
Oh, totally, totally.
about food. And I think that can be hard for anyone, but I think especially challenging for people with ADHD who might already be dealing with, like, you know, some emotional regulation stuff or impulse control.
Yeah, so it's just like another layer.
Another layer, exactly.
Like things to navigate, which is a lot.
It is a lot, and it's complex, and I think that's why
Right.
that's what makes, like, the treatment part of this conversation so important.
Totally. Go over it.
Because I think, you know, it can feel very overwhelming.
Right. Like, I have both of these things. This is a lot.
Right? Like, where do you even begin? But I do think there's a lot of hope
Okay.
in terms of, like, how we approach treatment. And the article really emphasizes that it's not insurmountable
Okay. Yeah.
to heal and to recover from this.
So what does that look like then? What are some of the, like, I guess, most hopeful or helpful treatment options that give people the best chance?
So the article really emphasizes treating both things together,
Okay.
treating the ADHD and the addiction at the same time.
So not like, okay, we fixed this thing, now let's move on to this thing. It's like,
Right, not sequentially.
they address it all at once.
Yeah, more like tackling them both head on.
Got it.
And medication can definitely be a part of that,
Okay.
especially in terms of managing those core ADHD symptoms. But
Right. But like we said before, it's got to be.
it's got to be the right medication,
Yeah.
you know, because
Some of them can be addictive themselves. So it's like, how do you.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
Yeah.
The article talks about non-stimulant medications as potentially being a safer option for some people who might be more susceptible to addiction. And
That makes sense.
but then beyond medication, there's a big emphasis on therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy in particular.
Okay, yeah, we hear about CBT a lot, like in a lot of these discussions about
All the time, yeah.
mental health and addiction and all that. So how does that fit into this specifically?
So CBT can be really helpful because it teaches people these really practical strategies to manage those, like, tricky situations, those, like, trigger points.
So like when you feel yourself like about to make that bad decision, there's something you can.
It gives you that pause, you know, where you can be like, oh, okay, I recognize this thought pattern.
Right.
I'm having a craving right now. How do I work through this in a healthy way?
So you're not just like at the whim of your immune chemistry.
It gives you a little bit of space.
Right.
To make a different choice.
I like that.
And then on top of that, the article also talks about support groups, which I think is huge.
Right, that community aspect again.
Yeah, because it can make such a difference.
Totally.
To be able to connect with people who truly understand, you know, what you're going through, share experiences without judgment.
No shame.
Yeah, exactly. And offer that encouragement.
It's like that, like being seen, you know, and not feeling so alone.
Totally.
Which I think it can be so powerful.
It's everything, yeah.
So for someone listening who's like, maybe this is all kind of new information, or they're just now like putting these pieces together, what would be like the biggest takeaway you'd want them to leave with?
I would say, you know, if you have ADHD, knowledge is power. So be aware of the connection to addiction, but
Yeah.
don't let that scare you because there are effective treatments out there.
Okay.
And recovery is absolutely possible.
I like that.
It's not a hopeless situation.
Yeah, don't despair. There's a
Not.
way through.
There's a way through, yeah.
Well, this has been really great, really interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for diving into this with me, and for everyone listening. Like, if this resonated with you, if you're like curious to learn more,
Yeah.
please, reach out to somebody, do your own research.
There's so many resources out there.
There are, and like you said, there's help. You don't have to do it alone.
Exactly.
So until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and we'll see you all in the next deep dive.